So that brings us to the end of our talks, but I would like a really lively discussion. And I'm afraid for those of you at the back, there are no microphones at the back, but there are 2 at the front on either side. So I'd like to see people standing up and coming to ask questions or challenge our speakers. In the meantime, I'd like to pose it to the panel that proline sutures have been used for years and left in patients' abdomens, and they've never been incriminated for causing cancer or autoimmune phenomena. So what has suddenly happened that has changed the scene with polypropylene?
I think one of the things that we know from research is that the amount of polypropylene we use has an impact on the host response. So that seems to be why mesh for prolapse causes greater problems than the small amount of mesh used for slings. I think the other thing we know is that dependent on the mesh reacts and the patient reacts dependent on where it's implanted. Mesh used in the abdomen for hernia repairs and for colpopexy don't react as badly and seem to keep their flexibility much better than mesh does when implanted in the vagina. So I think that they're the 2 things that I will mention, the amount of mesh you use and where it's placed. I'm not aware of any evidence that it causes cancer, but certainly the inflammatory response is different.
I think that maybe I'm sceptical, but sacrocolpopexy and sacrohysteropexy meshes are implanted far deeper than something that's superficial in the vagina, like a tape or a prolapse mesh. And all I think we're doing is storing up future complications because they'll occur that many years later on. And I give an example. I received a picture of a piece of resected bowel from Australia from a woman who I had put in a sacrocolpopexy mesh 12 years previously, and she'd emigrated to Australia, and they couldn't believe that her rectal bleeding wasn't cancer, resected her bowel and sent me a picture to prove what an awful doctor I was. But I just think it's going to happen years later. Yes, Jerry.
I have a comment and a question. I'll start with the question. I agree. The most important thing is to get informed consent, no matter what we're doing. And it seems to me that we all get we give such different informed consent. If you see me or Linda, you're going to get opposite informed consent. So that's something that needs to be resolved. And I really would like to, and my comment really relates to that. Every single position paper by any of the organizations states that mesh is safe and effective. It never mentions complications. It never gives a number. What some of us think is safe is a complication rate of, I think we could all agree 2% of the patients have a serious complication, 1 or 2%. For you, that might be good. For someone else, that might not be good. We need to be honest about this and give numbers, not opinions and not words like safe and effective.
We have this year produced the 10-year data from the British Society of Urogynecology database, and it shows quite clearly that after 10 years of storing the data on bulking agents, colposuspensions, midurethral slings and autologous fascial slings, that autologous fascial slings have far more complications than the synthetic midurethral tapes. I mean, they are the data.
I don't think we should get into the particulars now, but the nature of the complications are very, very different. We'll just leave it at that. But I'd like to hear what you people think.
So Jerry, one of the things I've learned from the American barristers is that they prefer you not put numbers on things. You can use relatively higher or relatively lower. These are the defense. Our defense would say, but don't, the number 2% sounds horrendously low. Or, however, if the person who experiences a complication, it's 100% for that individual. That's where percents are misperceived by patients because they tend to downgrade the risk in their own mind. This is what very informed barristers have told me. So they prefer, at least in the United States jurisdiction, that we not use numbers. We can say relatively greater or relatively less because that way the patient understands that there is a difference, but you're not arbitrarily trying to minify by using very small numbers, which we all agree are true. In our evidence, they're true.
You're still going to hear from Linda that autologous slings have much more complications.
No, I said a higher complication rate.
Great, okay. And you're going to hear from me that the nature of the complications is so severe in the mesh that we need to take that into consideration. All I'm asking is how do we get informed consent when two world experts will disagree and respectfully disagree?
I mean,
I'll sit down, otherwise I'll keep talking.
I mean, I think the point is very well made that we all counsel patients in different ways. And of course, we will all counsel patients towards an operation that we prefer and we like doing and perhaps we're good at. In the UK now, we have patient decision aids, which are very structured and they give the risks, although sometimes with percentages, sometimes not.
Which none of the patients can understand and which we don't understand very well either.
And the idea is they take them home to read about each operation, the risks, the benefits, and then they make a decision. And you just hope they don't make the wrong decision, but that's in the nature of the principle.
Carry on, yeah.
Hi, Ruth Kirschner-Hermes from Bonn. I only wanted to mention, you said polypropylene as the only alternative mesh in the market available. That might be true for the US, but in Europe, and we have also polyvinyl difluoride, PVDF. So, and there have been a lot of data on histology that they fare better. Do you have any idea, should we take that also into account? At least this is a product on the market, and we all know how long it will take with the new MDR regulation that we have a new, better tissue on the market that will probably take 10 years, and we have to treat patients now.
I'm not aware of any specific data about that, but I don't think...
Klinger and Klosterhalfen, he published tons of data comparing explants, and in Germany he has the biggest database. He is a pathologist in my area, so that's why I got familiar with him already. I think I presented the data on material differences already 2010 at the ICS. And so in Germany, he has the biggest database on explanted material, prolapse and mesh.
Okay, thank you.
Just to
Yeah,
consider.
Gamal?
Question to Roger, actually. In the United States, was tightening on the slings from 2011 to recently abolishing all suspension, colpus suspension, mesh products. With the decreasing number of synthetic mid-urethral slings. At the same time, we have a gap between this and the future, which is the ideal sling. We don't know when it's going to come. What's your prediction in 5 years? Are there will be mesh slings in the United States, or it will be banned like other countries?
So from my understanding, the FDA is not going to do anything with mesh slings, so they will remain on the market. I still think there's enough loyal implanters that the mesh slings will still be a part of our armamentarium. And I still think there are patients who will select mesh. But I think, Gamal, I didn't bring up the entire Twitter storm that Dudley mentioned for England. As we know, it exists in the States too, and there's we call them the Hister sisters. And basically what the Hister sisters are the angry patients who've had mesh or have had relatives who've had mesh. And obviously those women demand, rightfully so, if they don't want something, they demand a biologic. I hope that there'll be a new biologic. There's lots of very, very good research going on now with cell derivative techniques and these new bioscaffolds that I hope we will be able to have something. But the problem, Gamal, that all of this has generated is the amount of evidence now to get new regulatory approval for any mesh, I think is going to be a very steep hill for any one entity. And I'm not sure they're going to be able, the small companies cannot afford the development process. So I think we're looking at suspension, slings, and bulking as sort of our primary modality, as they've always been. But I don't think, unless I'm missing something, at least in the U.S., mesh slings are not going away, at least in the FDA's eyes, unless some other new data set comes available in the next year.
You think FDA will not do anything for 5 years? So in 5 years, synthetic slings, less, more, or no?
Well, we've already seen a reduction,
Right.
less than the current reduction. There are
Yeah.
clearly surgeons who are unfamiliar with other options, and that's their only option that they have. So I think that you'll still see mesh slings being used by, again, loyal implanters. And again, from my standpoint, I'm okay if a person is an experienced implanter. There's several people in the room who do a lot of mesh excision, and I'm.
And make a lot of money out of it.
And make, well,
Oh,
that's,
yes.
that's a whole nother.
Renaud
but,
wants to say
yeah,
something.
If you do it the right way, you don't, actually. Anyway, mesh excisions, in my mind, are largely due to surgical errors or surgical technical flaws. And a lot of onus is being placed on the mesh, but as you well know, in the States, I do think we have a huge gap in technical training.
Renaud?
Yeah, I'll comment, Kamal, on your question. I think it's really important in our different countries to differentiate the mesh for slings surgery and also the mesh for vaginal surgery for prolapse. And the fact that in the UK there is all the meshes in the same bag, it could lead some confusion for patients and for regulation. So we really think in our country, in France, that it's important to explain to patients the difference that there is between tapes and mesh for prolapse, even if the same material, but it's not the same complication, not the same reoperation for complication. That is something which is really important
But when
to keep mesh.
when I went to give evidence to the Cumberledge Review, I sat in front of the panel and I tried to explain the difference between tapes for incontinence and mesh for prolapse, and they looked at me and they said, in the women's eyes, a mesh is a mesh is a mesh.
Correct, and most of the lawsuits are for mid-urethral slings, actually. Although we have no problem with prolapse anymore. It's, a ban.
Okay,
Right.
so I think it's time to finish. And if any of the panelists want to say any last final words, they're welcome to. But otherwise, I'm going to say thank you very much. I think this has been a really good and lively session, and I hope you've enjoyed it.